All right, this will be the last of the programs on the function of the muscle system. I'm going to talk about the function of whole muscles, describe different types of muscle and muscle cells, and describe some disorders. And I want to remind you that the muscular system is actually a system, that these are organs. And so they have more than just the muscle tissue in them, although we've been talking a lot about that. This system provides for movement. It holds structures in position, posture. It moves air in and out of the lungs, that's ventilation. As a byproduct, it produces heat and is involved in the control of temperature. Muscles are involved in communication and the production of speech and facial expression and posture, things like that. And then muscle provides the force necessary for the heart to contract and for many of the organs to do their jobs. So far, we've spent most of the time talking about how skeletal muscles work. We've talked about events, how the nerve stimulates a muscle with the neurotransmitter, how that muscle cell gets excited and goes through a depolarization and releases calcium inside the muscle cell. We talked about how the proteins, actin and myosin, how calcium gets them to interact, and what powers the ATP powers the stroke that allows these to slide past one another and allow the filaments to contract. And then last time I talked about the two sources of energy, aerobic and anaerobic metabolism. Okay, that provides the energy for contraction. The aerobic source, those reactions are done in the mitochondria. They require oxygen, so these muscles have excellent blood supply and a pigment that stores oxygen right in the muscle. It also uses glucose or fat as a source of energy, and these muscles resist fatigue and they can be used for long periods of time, all day. Anaerobic muscles produce ATP faster, and these reactions are short, so they produce lots of ATP. They use glucose only, but they use it at a really fast rate, and they power a really fast myosin, so they're much quicker. Unfortunately, they produce lactic acid, and this is what causes muscle fatigue. So, um, I talked about these two types of energy sources and muscles that are specialized for them. And I said, well, I'd say a little bit more about them. So this kind of explains one of the great mysteries of Thanksgiving, the difference between the drumstick and the breast muscle on the turkey. The drumstick is the dark meat, and this is slow oxidative muscle. And this has a slower myosin, but it also has extra blood vessels and this pigment myoglobin. And this is what makes this muscle dark. And it has higher iron content. And so if you like the drumstick, that's the for the turkey, that's the slow oxidative muscle, and it is dark meat or dark red. Okay. On the other hand, the breast muscle is white. This has the faster myosin in it, and it's anaerobic. So it doesn't need myoglobin and it doesn't need all these blood vessels. It stores sugar as glycogen and it has extra myosin, and that myosin contracts very fast. So it can power the turkey to take off, but turkeys don't migrate south. They can only fly to the top of the barn or the top of a tree. So this is the two basic types of muscle. And actually, there is an intermediate type. I've talked about the slow oxidative and the fast glycolytic, but there's also fast oxidative glycolytic, which is kind of intermediate. And both the slow oxidative and fast oxidative, these can be, they're found in legs and in postural muscles, and they can be enhanced through like endurance type training. Okay, now I want to switch to talk about the response of whole muscles. Okay, and we can measure this in myograms. And a myogram is just a chart of force versus time or tension versus time. And when a muscle cell is stimulated by a nerve cell, there's a little lag phase, but then it contracts and eventually relaxes. These myograms can be made for an individual muscle cell or fiber, or for a whole muscle or whole motor unit. And then we can try with just one nerve stimulus or repeated nerve stimulus. And it turns out this is how muscles can produce kind of graded responses. So they can adjust to the amount of um, force that they have to apply and for the amount of time. And so a single muscle or a single impulse to a muscle cell produces a twitch. But if you have repeated impulses, this leads to something called TREP, or the staircase effect, where the muscle doesn't, if the impulses from the nerve come close enough, the muscle doesn't completely relax, and it becomes, the contraction becomes stronger over time. So you get a longer and a stronger contraction. And if you repeat this more and more, the contraction will get stronger and stronger. So this is the staircase. And eventually, through summation, you will produce a maximal contraction. Or this is called a tetanic contraction. And so we can produce stronger and stronger contractions by having nerves fire repeatedly and not letting the muscle cell relax in between. Okay, in addition, large muscles like our gluteus or our quadriceps muscles, they have different bundles of fibers that act together. Okay, where one nerve cell may activate 100 muscle cells. And these muscle cells that are activated by one nerve cells are motor units. And so we don't need to have all the motor units active at once. And so we can make a muscle contract stronger and stronger by activating more and more motor units. And so this is how we control muscles, so that we don't just have one response, we can produce tons of responses. Likewise, we maintain partial contraction for long periods of time. This is muscle tone. So we maintain some tension, and we can also um, change the length of the muscle without changing the tension, or we can cause a change in tension but hold the muscle length the same. And so these are referred to as isometric versus isotonic contractions. And so this allows us to, these tools allows us to produce smooth, steady muscle contractions. We can alter how we activate the cells, how many cells are activated at once, and so this allows us to produce nice, smooth responses. Okay, this is also the point where I want to start talking about other types of muscle, because all muscle has actin and myosin, but different muscle works differently. In cardiac muscle, this muscle contracts on its own, and actually nerve cells aren't involved. It's involuntary, and it's autorhythmic. Even with no stimulus from anywhere else, the heart muscle will contract, and that contraction spreads from one cell to another because the cells are joined by these little electrical connections called intercalated discs. And so this allows the pumping action to be coordinated without the constant intervention of nerve cells, and so it's going to contract on its own. Smooth muscle is kind of similar to cardiac muscle in that it's autorhythmic and involuntary, but here it's not strided like cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle. The sarcomeres, there really aren't sarcomeres. The fibers are kind of linked up in a different way. And so instead of having all the sarcomeres lined up, they're connected to these dense bodies. And when the cell contracts, it contracts not just lengthwise, but it can also contract in thickness. And there's other ways that these muscle cells are different. The smooth muscle, instead of having sarcoplasmic reticulum, it has calcium from extracellular sources enter the cell. And instead of binding troponin, it binds calmodulin. And so it's a slightly different way of contraction. But you still get cross bridges formation, and you still use ATP. But the mechanism of transferring phosphates to ATP is slightly different. And so kind of different. Smooth muscle is found in hollow organs, and like skeletal muscles, it may maintain a constant pressure on the contents, but allow changes in volumes. And it's autorhythmic, but it has very slow contractions and it can maintain tone without expending much energy. So a really kind of neat way of doing things. Cardiac muscle, here I have a couple pictures. It's only in the heart, strided, but not voluntary, with a single nucleus, and again, those electrical connections that allow the cells to function as a single unit. Autorhythmic, contracts at a fairly steady pace. Okay, and then I wanted to say a little bit about skeletal muscles and training, or the lack of training. This is called hypertrophy or atrophy. Muscles can be increased in size, and this is due to increases the size of the number of muscles and the size of the muscles. And both aerobic or anaerobic activities can lead to hypertrophy. But those repeated types of activities will produce different types of muscle. So if you use aerobic activity, you'll get more slow twitch characteristics of the muscle. And if you use anaerobic activities to produce new muscle, you'll get more fast twitch fibers. And so training does increase the number of cells, particularly in young people, and in the size of the cells, like in older people. On the other hand, a lack of use decreases the size of muscle. And so you can have smaller fibers and you can actually lose fibers. And particularly as you get older, you tend to lose muscle mass, and you may lose the fibers. And fast twitch fibers are lost more than slow twitch fibers. Okay, but again, training can offset this, and so training can slow the loss. Okay, I want to say a little bit about some things you might have heard about with muscles. Muscle cramps are involuntary contractions that can be caused by several things. One is a lack of ATP. ATP is needed for the muscle, the actin and myosin, to disengage. And if you run out of ATP, the muscle gets stuck together. The actin and the myosin are stuck together and you can't relax the muscle. You can also wind up with cramping due to electrolyte imbalances. I've talked about muscle fatigue. Muscles lose the ability to contract, and this is not just psychological fatigue, it's just they lose the ability. After lots of anaerobic activity, okay, that changes the pH of the muscle, and that accumulates the waste product lactic acid, and that's got to be transported out and transported to the liver before the muscle is ready to work again. And then I've got some zombie pictures there, okay, zombies. That's just not scary to me because I've had so much anatomy. Okay. As muscles decay, they don't work. But there is one kind of interesting exception. As after a person dies, okay, when they first die, their muscles are limp because there's no nerve signals going, and so their muscles aren't contracted. But as the decomposition proceeds, eventually the sarcoplasmic reticulum breaks down and releases calcium. When that happens, that release of calcium happens, the muscle will contract, and that can be quite sudden. And so you hear stories of corpses sitting up. They're not alive, they're not zombies. What's happened is the sarcoplasmic reticulum has released calcium, and that initiates contraction. There's nothing to take the calcium out, so they remain contracted. I should also talk a little bit about some other conditions that affect muscles. One of those is muscular dystrophy. This is a genetic disease that causes progressive weakness of muscles. And some of the proteins for this are on the X chromosome, so this more often affects boys than girls. But these defects in muscle proteins mean that muscle cells die or cannot be contracted after a time. One of the proteins that's most commonly affected is dystrophin. It's a cytoskeleton protein in the sarcolemma that links actin to the tendon. And for some reason, they stop producing it as they get older. And eventually, this will lead to paralysis of the respiratory muscles. So quite serious. Another kind of disorder that affects the muscles is myasthenia gravis. This is an autoimmune disorder where the immune system starts attacking the motor end plate where the nerve meets the muscle cell. And this is characterized by weakness, fatigue, and the Myasthenia Gravis or MG antibody that acts against the receptors. Okay, and so these means that it's, even though the nerve cell releases acetylcholine, there's not enough of it because there's too few receptors. So they have this kind of limp paralysis. Often it affects the face. And so they'll have a droopy eye and a droopy side of the face. That we see this early. We can treat this with immunosuppressants, with a drug that slows the removal of acetylcholine. That's an anticholinesterase, and several other things. Okay, so in summary, muscles are organs. The organs function in a variety of ways: movement, posture, respiration, communication, temperature regulation. Talked about muscle tissue, contraction, energy for muscle cells. And in this program, we talked about muscle responses: twitch, trep, and summation, and motor unit recruitment. And then a little bit about cardiac and smooth muscle and muscle disorders.